first of all, required reading, just my opinion, required reading for anyone who is living in the world today. Stand Your Ground,
Mhm.
your amazing book. If you have any questions on how to be an ally, any questions on how we got here, any all of that could be answered in Stand Your Ground. An amazing, amazing work. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for that.
So part of Union's mission and vision is to wrestle with the big questions of the day. And in your book, Stand Your Ground, you wrestle with what you said really affected you about Trayvon Martin's murder, and that the president, Barack Obama, had asked the question or posed the question in some way of could Trayvon have stood his ground? And you really take us through that in such an insightful way. But I wanted you to just tell us a little bit about that question and why it meant so much to you.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. I think when I think of the process of really writing this book, or that book, Stand Your Ground, I have to first say that I had no intention of writing that book. And in fact, had said to myself that I was sort of done. I had no more to say and couldn't imagine what more I did have to say theologically. But, uh, so in many respects, that book called me because for me, theology doesn't start up here, right? That theology is really indeed, I mean, it is what Anselm said, as inviting as that may sound, or as boring as it may sound, to quote someone like Anselm. Anselm said that theology is faith seeking understanding, right? And that's so true because for me, Stand Your Ground, as my other books, but especially Stand Your Ground, came as a result of me wrestling with my faith and trying once again to understand the meaning, in this instance, of God's justice uh, at a time when indeed we were not seeing manifestations of that justice for Black people, right? And for which we haven't, but at a time when we saw again this rise in the attack up on Black male bodies, in particular, but of course also the Black female, Black trans body. It was Blackness in this regard that was the common thread. And so here I was once again saying, how in the world am I to maintain my faith as I navigate what it means to be Black in a world, in a society where Black lives don't matter and haven't mattered? This became even more pressing for me, however, in relationship to Trayvon, because at that time, I still have a son, but my son at that time was a couple of years older than Trayvon, right? And in Trayvon, I saw my son, and we've gone through the realities of trying to prepare my son with how to navigate the dangerous world of being Black and male in this society. So this was an urgent question for me, and I needed first simply to understand what was going on, why in this era of a Black president we are seeing the heightened attack on Black bodies. So for me, first and foremost, it was what I call almost sort of this forensic study into trying to move from Trayvon back to understand, okay, what is really going on here? And I just tried to follow the story. I thought that I would end up in one place at the time of chattel slavery, and I ended up at a quite different place. In reality, it really in first century philosophical thought with Tacitus' misunderstanding of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism. I was stunned to get there, but I remember when I got there, Carmen, and I just shouted out to my spouse, "Oh my God, we've got to get Desmond out of here because there's no hope. This thing is embedded in the very fabric of our nation." And that's then became a crisis of faith because I utterly said there's no hope. How do I maintain faith in the reality of a context in which it looks like there's no hope for Black lives ever to matter? There's no hope for my son to be able to grow into the fullness of who he is safely, right? In this context. What that's a different crisis of faith. So, I explored the meaning of that and went on that journey and recognized that, this is the story of Black faith, right?
Hmm.
That Black faith didn't emerge in the context where everything was going well. It emerged in the context always of Black struggle for justice, Black struggle for life, with the belief in a God who is on the side of justice and centered, right, in this crucifixion, which is always that tension between the death and the hope,
Hmm.
and it's a hope that always comes through crucifying realities. So that's a long answer to your question, but to me, Stand Your Ground was a journey, and I am so glad that other people found my journey interesting, because it really was my journey to try to figure it out, and then my journey to try to figure out how I could maintain faith in the midst of such a reality.
Well, I definitely enjoyed your journey and it affected me and has enlightened me and took me to places I didn't expect to go as well. So, again, thank you. Um, as everyone right now in the world is experiencing some form of disruption, we see with Black Lives Matter that that question is being publicly raised. What was the hypothetical is now being publicly raised in Georgia with the case of William Marcus Wilson. And he is a young biracial man who identifies as Black and has a white girlfriend, and he is driving down the street and being taunted by a truck of white people who have been drinking, and he fires his gun because he felt threatened. And he is using the stand your ground defense, except he is still in jail as they await with what to do with his future. And so I just wonder. I want to ask, are you hopeful this time? But what I will ask
Mhm.
is, what are your thoughts? Where are we now with that question that is now became flesh?
Yeah, can Black people stand their ground? Can Trayvon stand his ground? And the Trayvons of the world stand their ground. The Breonna Taylors of the world stand their
Mhm.
ground. The Sandra Blands of the world stand their ground. Um, and, obviously, not obviously, but maybe it is obviously to some of us, no, they can't. That law was never meant for people of color and especially Black people. That law was meant as a quote unquote defense against the dangerous Black body and a defense of uh, the realities of whiteness to be able to stand uh, its ground. And I think and this is where we are in this country. This is the reckoning, right?
Mhm.
That presumably the country is now facing this reckoning with the realities of what white supremacy actually means. And that white supremacy is, in fact, about laws and policies. Hence, it is systemic, it is structural, it is also cultural, it is also ideological. White supremacy impacts the lives of people of color, not simply in these abstract ways or structurally or systemically, but they impact the lives of people of color every single day they leave their home, right? And you have to be aware. of what you can and cannot do as you are raced Black. And so we are we are raised to know when and where we can stand our ground or what ground is ours to stand on, right? And so I think I don't know what will happen in the particular case of William Marcus Wilson. Does I don't know the particularities of get that case, but this is what we do know that for the body raced Black, that in fact there is a presumption of guilt, not a presumption of innocence. For the body raced white, there is a presumption of innocence. For the body raced Black, there is not an assumption of humanity. Uh, for the body raced white, there is an assumption of sacred humanity to be
Mhm.
protected at all costs. And so it is not unusual for what we see in this case publicly that it is easier to believe a white perpetrator than it is to believe a Black victim. It is easier to arrest a Black victim than it is to arrest a white perpetrator. And so, we had this is just the reality of what we all know of what it means to be Black and raced Black in this country. And this is what this country has to reckon with, right? We will only become this democracy that is a vision for freedom and justice for all in as much as we began to craft that vision and understand the meaning of that vision from the people who have been on the utter underside of white supremacist injustice uh, in this country. That, by the way, is what the cross is all about. That God of Jesus Christ entered into utter solidarity with those persons who are on the underside of justice in this world. And that the only way to understand or to move toward the more just future that God promises us all is if we start that movement from the bottom up, from the people who have least experienced justice and who have most experienced injustice. When they say, that's justice, then we know that we're on the arc that bends toward justice. And so, that's what our country has to reckon with, but that's also what our faith communities have to reckon with, because our faith communities are accountable to that more just future, not accountable to society as it is. Our faith communities must help this nation free itself from a vision of justice that has been shaped by white supremacist ideologies, a vision of justice that has been shaped by what is possible within the realm of our society and our social imagination. Faith communities have to shape our moral imagination according to what is possible in relationship to God's more just future. And so, it's just really important. Faith communities are important, and hence it's important what we do here at Union in preparing students to engage in transforming ministries. And it's important who we are as an institution, because as a theological institution, we must, it's not a choice, we must have a voice and a presence on the public square, uh, uh, advocating for, even as we embody that more just future.
Well said. I nothing left to say. Thank you for that. As you were talking, I'm reminded that you are going to be in the classroom that will be teaching Black theology in this upcoming semester. And makes me wish I was a student again, first and foremost. And second, for those prospective students who are watching, what is Black theology and what can we all expect from the classroom?
Well, I'm excited to be back in the classroom. We'll see what you can expect in the classroom. I don't know. I'm moving nervously into the classroom. You know, I really am. I mean, I've been teaching for some over 30 some years, but I've also not taught in this context at all. But Black theology, you know what? Simply put, you know, theology is, as we say, God talk, but it's not God talking about God's self. It's people talking about uh, God and trying to understand the sort of movement of God in their history. And so Black theology is about Black folk talking about God, to put simply, but in other words, put another way, Black theology is about Black people trying to understand their faith in the context of a world in which being Black, simply put, ain't easy. So it's about Black people trying to understand and navigate their faith in a context of being Black. In this instance, in a country that, in fact, has not affirmed yet that Black lives matter. And so, and that's what Black theology is. It emerges from out of the hush harbors, if you will, of enslavement, informed by an African religious heritage. So you can expect when you enter into this Black theology class that you're going to start on the other side of the Middle Passage, because while some Black folks may have been introduced to Christianity through the barbarous route of enslavery, of being enslaved, they were not introduced to God. They knew God before. They knew God in freedom, and God knew them in freedom. And that
Mhm.
understanding of God is what allowed them to not accept an understanding of God that said that they were created to be enslaved. And so to reject their slaveholders' version of God and their slaveholders' version of Christianity. So when you enter into this class in the fall, be ready to go back across through the middle passage, because we're going to start. I know we're going to, you're going to start with, so you start reading it now if you're listening. We're going to read Equiano's narrative, uh, uh, because that narrative is one, if not the only narrative that we have that where we really see the religion of this African religious tradition from through the eyes and the vantage point of one who would soon be captured. And so that's where we're going to start and figure out how we got here. So Black theology, the Black theological scholarship, perhaps started in the 1960s with our great Professor James Cone, and it's because of him that we can talk about it. But that's not where Black theology started, because that's not where Black faith started. And so where there's Black faith, there's Black theology. So that's what we're going to try to figure out.
I'm so jealous already. You've already got me excited. I'm like, I've got to get in this class. Uh,
We'll see.
well, just let me say thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And I wanted to just ask you before you go off to do many, many more great things. As you guys can see, Dean Douglas is exceptional and a rare gem that we are so blessed to have here at Union. Um, is there any advice or wisdom you would just pass on to prospective students considering coming to Union?
Oh, you know, I always hate that question. But you know, I just Come open, really ready to it's not about being challenged. We always hear, come ready to be challenged. Come open, ready to be surprised. And that's my advice.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of UTS's Inside Admissions.